Analytics suggest that these guys could be taking big steps forward this season. These wide receivers are guys you should possibly trade for on your fantasy football teams. Let's get into them, and let's start with the first guy here. It's going to be George Pickens. And as you know, Nathan has been on record saying that he hates George Pickens, and he's the bane of his existence. I wouldn't go that far. I'd say with George Pickens, there's a lot of talent there, and you've seen it. Some of his analytics this year are very good. 11th in targets, 5th in target share, 14th in target rate. So the opportunity is there, and we all know that. The problem has been he has 1 touchdown in the year, which is 56th in the league. And the red zone upside for George Pickens is what we've been really concerned about. But when you're looking at some of the analytics that suggest whether or not a player will be performing at a high level from a fantasy football perspective, there is one statistic over the years that we've looked at, and we have found that there is a direct correlation between this statistic and fantasy points per game or fantasy production, and that statistic is yards per route run. So basically, the formula for this is exactly how it sounds. For every route that a receiver runs, this is going to be routes where they are targeted or not targeted in a game, how many yards per route are they getting? So it's the total number of routes divided by the total number of yards. And this basically tells you how efficient with their opportunity a wide receiver is. George Pickens, in terms of yards per route run, is ranked 7th in the NFL right now among receivers. And again, this is a statistic that tells you how, essentially it translates to, like, we will use this to say how good is a receiver. And then also, is this receiver capable of being that fantasy productive? Now, what we found with George Pickens, and what you'll see we found with a lot of these guys on this video, is there's a pretty big discrepancy between the yards per route run and the points per game. Ranked 7th in the league in yards per route run among wide receivers, but among wide receivers, he is 35th in points per game.
So I have a question for you.
What's your question?
How is this possible? Like, seriously. I mean, number one, this is impressive because I own George Pickens in the Flock League. I took him at price because I thought that there was a decent amount of opportunity there with Russell Wilson. Justin Fields starts playing, and I want to die. And now Russ comes back, and George Pickens looks really, really good and is starting to do what I hoped that he could do to start the season. But he's their wide receiver 1. Like, he's been their top option all season. He's on the field all the time. How are his yards per route run that good?
So when you're calculating it, the reason that it's getting there is because he is 11th in targets. However, when you're looking at his actual routes run, he's 44th in the league in routes run. He's only run 151 routes. He's running 25 routes per game.
Yeah.
So the main thing is, and what you need to understand is he's being targeted a ton when he runs routes.
On the field.
Like, when he is on the field, he is getting targets. And this is coming off of a game where we just saw George Pickens have his best game of the season by far. 9 targets, 5 receptions for 111 yards, and a touchdown. And the key point here is a touchdown. What we're seeing basically is independent of touchdown production for George Pickens, we know that he is capable of producing at least somewhat, right? Yes, there are going to be games where he has 4, 5, 8 points. When George Pickens has red zone upside and touchdown upside, this is where you're going to see George Pickens actually be productive. And the one metric that you need to key in on that really tells you should probably be buying George Pickens at this point. Yes, I will go that far. Is that he is 10th in the NFL. I don't
disagree with you.
He is 10th in the NFL in red zone targets right now. And so, yeah, you might even say, which I don't think you will, but if you are, not there, you're probably going to say, oh, you said to sell George Pickens earlier. And we were right, because George Pickens lost a ton of value from after week 2 or 3, we told you to sell him. He's lost a lot of value. Now he's a good value because of 2 things. Number 1, he's getting red zone targets. Number 2, Russell Wilson is significantly better for his fantasy upside, particularly for touchdowns.
I think those two things are, I think those 2 things are intertwined, the red zone targets and Russell Wilson.
Yes,
it's not just a 1-2, it's a both ands. When Russell Wilson is on the field, and as well as he played against the New York Jets secondary on Sunday night, I think that constitutes him, barring injury, being a starter for the rest of the season for the Pittsburgh Steelers after they just dropped 37 freaking points with him. And that, to me, makes me ecstatic about George Pickens for the rest of the season. Like, legitimately. And Pickens is still Pickens. He's going to have boom. He's going to be boom bust. He's going to have some bad games. He's not going to be an absolute target hog. We just saw that the amount of routes that he's actually run this season is not that much because he isn't really a true alpha.
Correct.
But with those red zone targets, my favorite thing about those red zone targets is dang near half of those came in one game. When Russell Wilson was on the field. When Justin Fields was playing, they weren't coming super often, and when they were barely even relevant red zone targets because they weren't accurate half the time. So I'm with you on that. I'm incredibly optimistic with George Pickens for the rest of the season, and personally, for a guy that went out on a limb and decided to invest in him in the one league that I cared the most about, and it looked awful. Now I actually have a little bit of hope because he's a guy that I have to start every single week, and now there's some decent upside with Russ. So it looks great. Next guy that we got to talk about here that his outlook has looked a lot more positive than we expected to start the season is Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin is pretty close behind George Pickens with 2.2 yards per route run this season, ranked 11th in the league, and he is 18th in the NFL in points per game at the moment. He is just classic Terry McLaurin, oh so consistent, but now he actually has a quarterback that can consistently get him the ball accurately. That's something he's never had in his entire career. I mean, the quarterbacks that he's had to play with since he came into the NFL, I can't even name most of them because they were awful and they were replacement level guys. His red zone targets haven't been anything special. If you watch Terry in his games, he is much more of a possession wide receiver, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That constitutes a very high floor guy, and you have seen that really over the last month as Washington has really turned it on. You just know exactly what you're going to get from Terry McLaurin from a target volume and production perspective. I mean, this guy, even without Jaden Daniels playing the majority of that Carolina game, he still had a great day. Had 6 targets, 6 receptions, 98 yards for 15 points. Since week 3, since the Cincinnati game, he has had 20, 18, 13, 23, and 15 points in PPR formats with 6, 10, 8, 7, and 6 targets. Every single week that Terry McLaurin is playing, you are guaranteed to get 6 to 10 targets. I mean, you've seen it for 6 straight weeks now. I think with Terry, it's a lot more clear knowing what to do with him based on this analysis. Number one, you have to look no further than watching Washington on a Sunday and seeing that, number one, their offense is really good. Number two, Terry McLaurin is really been unlocked by Jaden Daniels. And number 3, he is 1,000% a hold. You're not selling Terry McLaurin unless you get some crazy, ridiculous steal. You're probably not able to buy Terry McLaurin because his rest of the season outlook is so positive, and I wouldn't go out of my way to like crazy overpay for him. But heck to the no, he ain't a sell. And you just saw that even with the Jaden Daniels injury concerns, quote unquote, that a lot of people had going into this season. When he went down, Mariota got him the ball anyways. It didn't matter because Kingsbury is a really, really solid offensive coordinator. Way better than many people expected, though we did tell you to keep an eye on him in that situation before the season started. Terry has just benefited like crazy from all of those changes that Washington has done this year. So
it's getting close to crunch time in fantasy football, and so it's time to make sure that your team is set up for success in the playoffs. We've been doing team reviews all season long and continue to do a lot of them now to make sure that people are set up for success, and this involves who you should be trading away, who you should be buying, how your positions grade out, etc. You can get all of this with our team blueprint. You get one of these at the link in the pinned comment or link in the description on flockfantasy.com/domain. If you use code domain and you're a member, you're going to get a 30% discount on a blueprint. You get a free one at the annual Mother Flocker tier with all the tools. But we can do a team blueprint for you, Nathan. I do all these personally. We'd be happy to give you some trade targets and also some guys you should be trading away, as well as some full analysis on your fantasy football team to help you win your fantasy football league. But let's get back to it. All right, let's talk about Zay Flowers now. And the story with Zay Flowers is, of course, he has been productive at times this season. You saw, I think it was against Washington, he had 9 receptions, 132 targets, or 130. Wow, that's a lot. That'd be a lot of targets. 132 yards, all in the first half, actually. Didn't really do anything in the second half. But with Flowers, again, you're looking at 17th in targets and 27th in routes run, so there's a discrepancy there. He was ranked 14th in the league in yards per route run. His points per game, 22nd in the league. And again, the main thing for this is also he is not getting red zone targets and not scoring touchdowns. And so with Zay Flowers, there is a small discrepancy here, but the discrepancy for me in this one is not big enough to justify going and buying Zay Flowers. I think he's more of a hold. If you have him, I think you just hold him for the upside because he is the only really viable receiving threat in that offense right now, and consistent as well. But in terms of actually going and buying Zay Flowers, I'm not super high on that. I think this is kind of what Zay Flowers is going to be this year. And again, I think part of that is going to be because he is 38th in the league in red zone targets, and I don't really see that getting better. The situation is the same. You're talking about the same quarterback. You're talking about the same scheme. And so I think for Zay Flowers, in his perspective, I think you are talking about him pretty much having the same situation all season. He obviously is 10th in the league in target share, 28%, but this is a team that had 1 year where they didn't really run the ball the most in the league, and they're right back to it. Mm-hmm. So with Zay, I don't think I'm necessarily going out of my way to buy him, and the discrepancy is not big enough for me, 14th to 22. And actually, in fact, I think his rank actually decreased a little bit after this week. It's not enough for me to go buy Zay Flowers just because situationally, I don't think it's going to be a more advantageous situation for him to score more touchdowns. He's only 36th in the league in unrealized air yards. It's not like he's missing out on a ton of opportunity. Yes, he's efficient. But I feel like high efficiency, low touchdown upside is kind of the player that Zay Flowers is, and I don't think that's going to change because the situation is.
I kind of view him similar to Terry with maybe a little bit of a lower floor because he wins so much differently than Terry does, but the fantasy output ends up being pretty much the same when you're talking about weekly upside.
So I think I would prefer Terry.
I would prefer Terry as well.
Him. Yeah. So
I do want to talk about Ladd McConkey because this is an even uglier situation in my opinion than the Baltimore Ravens receiving game, and it's shown in the fact that Ladd is really the lead receiver there, and he still isn't productive, and he hasn't had a great start to the season. Now, I would expect him to be on the up for the rest of the season. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one being Justin Herbert is his quarterback, and even though Greg Roman is very run-heavy offensive play caller, I think that Justin Herbert is good enough of a quarterback to not just transcend the situation. I think his ceiling production-wise is capped, but he'll be able to distribute the ball consistently and effectively to the receiving assets there, regardless of how many times they throw the ball on a weekly basis. And I think Ladd McConkey is going to start to really be the main beneficiary of that. They drafted him to be that guy, and he's already shown in flashes that he's capable of doing that. He's got a very, very modest yards per reception that's very sustainable for the rest of the year. He can play that possession wide receiver role, which again, in this type of offense, this type of style of offense, I want that receiver that is Ladd McConkey. I trust him to be the most consistent down the line. And when you're looking as a contender towards the playoffs and trying to make that push and trying to get the best seed you possibly can and even make a run deep into the playoffs for a championship, I think Ladd McConkey is a guy that could be a late season riser and really start to show what he's capable of, even in the red zone. He hasn't had a crazy amount of red zone targets so far because the Chargers haven't been in the red zone that much. But I think you're going to start seeing that go up and up as they're starting to figure it out as a team offensively, and Justin Herbert starts to really adjust to this new style of offense that he's not been used to, with Staley and Kellen Moore just launching the ball downfield all day. I think Ladd is going to be totally fine. Quentin Johnson has been getting some really nice big play touchdowns, but that is just straight up not sustainable. You can trust that Ladd McConkey is going to get his continued target volume for the rest of the season.
Let's talk about one that's a little bit different here in Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, Marv didn't miss any time with the concussion, but when you're looking at his targets versus his route runs, he's 38th in targets in the league. He only has 37 targets in the season. That's 6 a game, and 41st in routes run. So, like, there's not really a discrepancy here. And the main difference between him and somebody like Zay Flowers or Ladd McConkey or even Terry McLaurin is that he is 7th in the league in total touchdowns because he does have 4 touchdowns. Now, obviously, multiple of those came in one game, but when you're talking about the red zone targets for Marvin Harrison Jr., 4 red zone targets on the season. He has 4 red zone targets and 4 touchdowns. And not all of the touchdowns were red zone touchdowns, but that being a 1-to-1 ratio is kind of insane. Because he's not really a burner, big play, Jamar Chase type of guy, right? Really, when you're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. and what he should be doing in that offense is he should be getting, once you get down in the red zone, the targets that we saw him get in the game where he did pop off. Unfortunately, you haven't really seen a lot of those targets given to him again. He should be getting a lot of those back shoulder fades. He should be getting a lot of those one-on-one. He's not, though. And so what you're betting on when you're betting on Marv, who is, when you're looking at the discrepancy between his yards per out run rank and his points per game rank, he's 23rd in yards per out run, and he's 36th in points per game. What you're betting on is that this guy he does have a lot of unrealized air yards. He does have a high touchdown rate, but he's 62nd in receptions and 38th in targets. And so if they start using him more and use him how he should be used consistently, you're naturally going to see somebody who is a very efficient receiver, who is a very dominant receiver, especially against man coverage. You're going to start seeing him be more fantasy productive than he is now. Again, 36 in the league in points per game right now. I expect that to finish more in the 20 to 24 range as the season goes on, just because if they do use him in the red zone, his touchdown rate, I think, is going to be very high. And it's not a bad thing for as dominant as an X wide receiver as he can be, and we know that as a prospect. It's not a bad thing for him to have a high touchdown rate. And so with that, I think Marv is a guy you buy for upside, right? I think if you've got a team with a bunch of safe guys, like a high target guys, slot guys, non-touchdown dependent guys, Marv is a guy you plug in there for the touchdown upside. And again, if you're playing in 6-point receiving touchdown leagues, but 4-point passing touchdown leagues, I mean, it makes Marv, it makes wide receivers that score touchdowns and running backs that score a lot of touchdowns that much more valuable. Mm-hmm. And especially in standard scoring leagues and things like that. I think he's a great trade target. I think he has lost a little bit of value, and honestly, I'm betting on him performing better than he has so far this season as the season goes on and as he gets more familiar with Kyler and that offense and he continues to stay healthy. So he's definitely somebody that I think has the qualities of a guy you would go buy in fantasy football just for, again, the touchdown upside and how they should be using him for the rest of the season.
I'm going to bunch these two guys together, the next two guys that we have here, because they're on the same team, same situation, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Tua's coming back. He's practicing on Wednesday. They're expecting him to play this Sunday, barring any setback. When Tua's back, say hello to wide receiver 1 Tyreek Hill again. He's going to go insane. I want to focus on Jalen Waddle a little bit more because I think his rest of the season outlook has been significantly hurt, a lot more than Tyreek Hill's. And honestly, I don't think there really has been a linear correlation with how Tyreek Hill has fallen versus how Waddle has fallen due to the Tua injury. When in reality, they both really equally benefit from Tua coming back and what their preseason production expectations were when Tua was healthy.
Yeah.
So with Waddle, I do think he is going to be the better value here. Tyreek, he's a hold. If you got him at a discount before Tua came back because people thought he was going to retire, good for you. With Waddle, I think he was a buy before this news came out, and I think he still could be a buy because, like I said, his rest of the season outlook was massively hurt. He has been straight up unstartable, one of the last guys you want to put in your lineup. No-name guys have been more startable than Jalen Waddle has been, and his yards per route run has still been 1.5. Was 35th in the league, which, again, is not anything sexy, but something with Waddle that I want to touch on is just not forgetting how consistent over the course of an entire season his production has been over the last 3 years. Yes, he is a boom-bust player, but he's very DK-esque in that what his final output is over the course of an entire season is very, very consistent. 2021, 15.4 points per game, 15th in the league. 2022, 15.3 points per game, 12th in the league. 2023, 14.2 points per game, 21st in the league. Obviously, that's come way down this year because Tua has not played. Tua is now playing. So expect the same type of output and the same huge game-to-game boom upside that Waddle had when Tua was on. Expect that to happen again. Get ready for it. And the moment it happens, which is as soon as this week, you're going to regret that you didn't invest in Jalen Waddle before Tua came back. So keep that in mind with both of these guys, mainly Jalen Waddle. I am really, really happy that both of these players who have just been, they've just totally suffered from Tim Boyle. Really. Tim Boyle.
I mean, can you blame them?
No. No, you can't.
And honestly, I hate to say it, they haven't had the best coaching this year. They really haven't. No. He's not really done a good job.
No, he hasn't.
Demario Douglas is going to be the last guy. And this is another interesting one because this is a guy who does have a pretty new situation compared to what he had 3 weeks ago. When you're looking at his yards per out run, 36th in the league among wide receivers and 60th in points per game. You've seen him be efficient with when he's been on the field. He is 39th in the league in targets. He is 5th in the league in slot snaps. So you're talking about a guy who is playing a lot of slot wide receiver, but he's 38th in the league in routes run. And so really not a discrepancy there at all. What it is for Demario Douglas is he just really needs more targets. And with Drake May, I think it's possible. In Drake May's first game, you saw him get 9 targets. He had 9 targets in 3 of 4 games for a stretch there. And then last week against Jacksonville, only had 3 targets. Let's wait and see. I mean, he's playing New York next week. Who knows who they'll put Sauce Gardner on, but the Jets defense has not been impressive recently. He plays the Titans after that, which is not. He plays the Bears after that. So Demario Douglas is probably not somebody that I think is going to perform over the next couple of weeks, and therefore probably not somebody I'm going to go out of my way to buy. But Demario Douglas could be the one for Drake May, and Drake May does look like he is going to give at least a little bit more fantasy value to some of the guys in that offense. But the main guy you saw benefit from that at least last week and probably the week before that too, although I think it was Demario Douglas to some extent the first week, is Hunter Henry. And Hunter Henry obviously last week had 17 points, and the week before had 13 points. The difference was he sustained it over a 2-week period with Drake May as the starter. I don't think Jalen Polk's going to do anything. Javon Baker hasn't really been doing anything. Kayshon Boutte actually has. But I'm looking at what he did in London. He only had 2 targets in London. Kendrick Bourne hasn't done squat. So it really is a wide open wide receiver room with a quarterback now that I do think can make at least one weapon there fantasy relevant. It is probably going to be Hunter Henry. So that's the main thing. Demario Douglas, for him, it's volume. We need to see over the next couple games how many targets he gets, probably before we're willing to go put him as a sneaky buy. So if you want to get him now, he's probably a waiver level guy. If you want to pick him off of waivers, I think that's good. I don't think you should go out and trade anything for him, but he is a guy, again, that is efficient, that is a good wide receiver, that's in a situation that's been less than ideal, but could be more than ideal, or at least somewhat ideal moving forward with Drake May as quarterback. And like I said, Drake May has looked very good in that situation. So there you go. Again, this statistic, a lot of times there are discrepancies. It's not gospel, right? It's not going to tell you exactly who is going to perform better. But there is a correlation. We've seen that over multiple years of fantasy football data, and obviously this is well known throughout the industry. So we thought we'd bring these discrepancies to your attention and see if these are any of these guys are guys you want to buy for your fantasy football teams, or what you should be doing with them. So make sure you show some love, show some support, drop a like, and make sure you're subscribed if you enjoyed the video. We really appreciate you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.